Ernie Fowlke, welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. I heard about you from Dave Champion, author of Income Tax, Shattering the Myths, and Body Science, in that interview that he did with you, which I watched. Very enlightening interview, and I had a private session with you, which I thought was very worth my while, very epiphany-like. And so I guess I'll ask you, first of all, it's great to be back, folks. Sorry for the layoff and all. It's been very hard the past couple months getting a new computer, having the computer shut down and all because of overheating and a power outage unexpectedly that caused me to have to cancel a show that I thought I had going, and a guest that was about to do the show but then had to postpone at the last minute. So, but I'm probably going to be doing 3 shows in 3 days now. Back with a vengeance of sorts, and Ernie's the first of my guests. So on this return. So, Ernie, who are you? What have you experienced? What causes you to do the stuff that you do? It was interesting how Dave Champion, Dave Champion has come out and said that he's a bit of an atheist and an agnostic, not really a very spiritual guy, but and yet he interviewed a guy like you who seems to believe in spiritual stuff. It seems kind of out of place. Maybe he's having a change of mind. I don't know, but it was interesting. So why don't you tell us who you are and what you experienced that causes you to do the stuff that you do? You've got the floor. This interview will be free the first like 30 minutes or so, and then the last 15, 20 minutes will be pay-per-view. So knock yourself out.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. I appreciate that. Yeah, the conversation with Dave really has been an ongoing one. And for anyone who has listened to him and what he has shared, I won't speak for his spiritual journey because that's for him to tell. But I know that he did grow up, in a religious, or with religion, and even as an adult, he shared going to different Christian denominations, and I think that this spiritual journey for me, as you talk about agnosticism, I think that is a place that I came to. I was raised in a Christian home, and as I started to question things, not in the greater Christian topic, but more so in the doctrine and beliefs of my own faith, I just started to question some things. And it has, that along with some personal experiences. So I was in real estate for 15 years, and then I got into marketing and started working for a company that I loved and believed in, and we were experiencing some great success. And then I had some of my own personal challenges, some conflicts, some things that was leading me kind of down a path that was very far from spiritualism, and so it brought me to a point because I had such a great experience as a child being introduced to the power of our thoughts and what our thoughts absolutely do create. And I believe that, but I also experienced a lot of conflict in those thoughts because I would hear my parents say one thing, our thoughts create and they're powerful and to be positive. And then on the other hand, I was told I was pessimistic and that, I may not amount to anything. And so there was some struggles that I had in my inner being. And so as an adult, I started to see that all of the things that I thought I knew, all of a sudden I started questioning it all. Which again, I think that's where I came to this point of being agnostic, not from a point of view of denying that there was spiritualism or there was some power outside of us greater than us, whether it's God, the universe, or cosmos. But agnostic really is this, I don't know. It comes from this point of view that people who have this absolute a surety that this is the way that things are and that our history is what it is, had me diving deep into that. I've been an avid reader since I was a child. I was grateful for my mother. She used to read to me very frequently. I was the oldest child, so I got a lot of one-on-one time with her, and I loved that she would read, and it gave me this passion for reading. So as I have dove into history, I've learned that we were very limited in what we receive as history. History is, as we know, is written by the victors. And so there are a lot of things that go missing. And I think I may have used this example, maybe not, but I'll share it here. You know, in elementary school, even throughout high school and college, when we learn about science, we learn about inventions, we hear so much of Thomas Edison and his 10,000 tries. And it's great, but when we dive deeper into the story of Thomas Edison, we know that he was in the pockets of big corporations and bankers, and that he also was known for stealing his employees' inventions and claiming them as his own. And we didn't hear very much as I did more studying. Obviously, Nikola Tesla is one that has created incredible technologies that we use today, and had a vision for what society could be. And in fact, he had worked for Edison and had been offered a $50,000 bonus if he could complete this invention. When he had completed it and went to Edison to claim his bonus, Edison told him that he just didn't understand American sarcasm or American humor, that he wasn't serious about the $50,000 bonus. And there was a real example that I lean on from Tesla. Is he decided to not continue working for Edison. He knew that he was a man that couldn't be trusted, and he, with his brilliant mind, with what he had already created as far as inventions, he went to work digging ditches. And fortunately was recognized by someone of prominence that knew he didn't belong in a ditch digging ditches. So, they pulled him out of that, and the rest is history about Nikola. But there's so much again that we weren't told about his history. So again, we mentioned Edison and his 10,000 tries, whereas Nikola Tesla had a totally different approach. He had stated that there is a core that he doesn't know the fullness, doesn't understand all of what this core is, but that he knows that he can tap into this core to give him strength, inspiration, and insight. And he would have visions, flashes of completed inventions come to his mind, and all he needed to do was draw them out or provide the instructions to an engineer, and they were exactly as he had envisioned. He didn't need to try over and over and over, make attempt after attempt. Not that he wasn't spending a lot of time thinking about the invention he wanted to create or wondering about a solution. He definitely did spend a lot of that time in contemplating and pondering, but he would turn it over to this core. And so I became fascinated with that. And there are so many other people in history that have received inspiration from non-thinking. So again, I go to the thinking, and this is where I think of Edison and his 10,000 tries versus people who have received dreams or flashes of insight. And I'm like, well, if that's available for them, is that not available for all of us? If there is this core, how do we access that? And so again, continuing my own personal journey, having read at the age of 13 books about mindset, so Think and Grow Rich, How to Win Friends and Influence People, these were books that I relied on. And then in my early 20s, I came across a book that it literally changed my life, and it's called The Master Key System by Charles F. Hannell. And it talked about the relationship between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, and how if really the things that we do without thinking. So driving comes to mind. You know, once we learn how to drive, we can do a lot of things. We can have conversations. We can be somewhat distracted, even though that's not the best advice, but we can do that. And even another simpler example of that is riding a bicycle. At the very beginning of riding a bicycle, and I remember my first time, Andrew, I'm curious if you remember your first time riding a bike, but I had this little old antique bike, and my grandparents were in the antique business, so I had this little old bike. It was blue, and I remember, you know, getting on the bike with my dad there, hand on the back of the seat, and I'm trying to pedal, balance, and steer so I don't go off the sidewalk. So there were a lot of things that my conscious mind was focused on in trying to ride this bike. And as we all do, eventually we turn this conscious activity of trying to master all of these activities into one to ride the bike. We turn it over to the subconscious mind. And once the subconscious takes it, then it just goes. And so we're able to ride a bike without thinking. All of a sudden we're riding our bike without our hands. We're riding wheelies if we're a boy, for sure. That was one of the things I love doing. But all of that we turned over to the subconscious mind. Anyone who plays a musical instrument, same thing. They're learning, they're practicing, and they spend a lot of time. And at some point, it goes over to this powerful subconscious mind. So again, the Master Key System was this very influential book. And then another book that became very influential to me was The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Campbell. Again, going deeper into this. So I wanted to access the mysteries of maybe we can talk a little bit about spiritualism here, but also the mysteries of our own abilities within our mind and within the psyche. What are all the components to the tools that we have? And it's interesting because in my early 40s, again, when I had all of these questions, I was questioning all my beliefs, and I started to go down a path that was unhealthy. I look back at those times, and I started to do some drinking that I hadn't ever done before, and as I was in the time, it was a very difficult time, and I thought I was being happy, but I realized that was a pivotal time for me to experience, because it led me on another path. And as I started to look at the books that have brought me where I was, I tried to go back to those, and I did. I re-listened to The Power of the Subconscious Mind. I had reread The Master Key System, and had even referred back a number of times to Think and Grow Rich, which I had read a few times before. And at this moment, I was still feeling stuck, going, oh, I'm just going to keep repeating, reliving my life. Where is the future of my life? Where am I to be directed? And so some of these questions started to come to mind, and I was led to other books that really opened up my understanding, not only to the power of our mind and what we have access to as human beings, but also to a new reality of spiritualism for me. And it was outside religion, and I don't need to necessarily go too far into that, other than I became very suspicious of religions, because I've seen throughout history how religion and governments have worked together to deceive the masses. And so denying spirituality, though, still wasn't in me, because I see all of these forces that are kind of supernatural that I had experienced a number of times, but I also was reading about all of these other great men and women who accessed this superpower. So I became very intrigued. And that is about the time, this was about 2014, when I was really going through these struggles. And then in 2016, and there was like this time period where I started to see information about Carl Jung, and I'd studied him a little bit. Going to college, again, we think about the people we hear about in history, and then the people we end up discovering. So in comparison to the relationship between Edison and Nikola Tesla, I discovered this relationship between Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Again, psychology, in college, I had taken psychology and really was fascinated and wanted to go into that field, and other circumstances, I chose that different path and ended up in real estate, but still fascinated with the structure of the mind and how we as humans tick. So as I started studying Carl Jung and his relationship with Sigmund Freud, they had worked together for 5 years and were very close. They went on speaking engagements, traveled to the United States, and spoke and taught their philosophies. And Freud was so impressed with Carl Jung and his understanding. He was quite a bit younger than Freud, and so Freud had this conversation with him after numerous in-depth conversations, one-on-one time together as they traveled. Freud said, I consider you as a son. Would you consider me as a father? And let's take these ideas that I've developed about the psychology of humans and continue my work. And Carl Jung very much appreciated the relationship that he had with Freud. However, at about that 5-year mark, Carl Jung noticed that there was this very deep desire for Freud to have Carl abide by his path and to teach it his way and to do his, basically to carry on his legacy and his mission. And as I dove deeper into the history of Carl Jung and the many experiences he had as a very young child with this, I say paranormal, but with this spiritual aspect of himself, his own dreams, and him spending so much time in solitude and the insights that would just come to him, he knew that he had his own path. And his path, he realized, had very much led him to Sigmund Freud and to learn from him. He throughout his years, he still had and held this respect for Freud, but there was some differing thoughts. As Carl Jung dove into psychology, he wanted all of his teachings to be very focused on the empirical. What's provable? What can we substantiate? What will the scientific community accept? And yet throughout his entire history, he was a prolific writer. I don't know of anyone up to this point who has written more than this one man. He's written so many books, and he had personal journals. In fact, he had this collection called that people refer to as the Black Books, and then or the Black Book, and there are many books that are in that collection. And then he also continued to write what eventually came out and was translated and released after his death, the Red Book. And what he has documented is this connection between the empirical or the scientific side of psychology, as he mapped out the different aspects of that and gave us so many terms. So, Carl Jung developed the terms introvert and extrovert. He talked about the collective unconscious, or the personal unconscious, the shadow that we all have, where we put things that we don't want to bring forward. And some of those things, when we think shadow, we think of darkness and maybe things that we're embarrassed about, which those things are there in the shadow as well. But it's also gifts and talents that we have that we might feel inadequate, or as many people experience in their 40s and 50s, is this imposter syndrome, where they've developed talents and skills, and then they get to a point and they realize that there's so much more that they don't know, that they don't understand. And so they experience this doubt. And I think that's maybe where I had come to at this point when I was in my 40s here in 2014 and then through 2016, where I was just experiencing so much doubt about everything. And of course, I was questioning myself and my own abilities. And, was what I knew now going to take me where I want to be? And through Carl Jung and many other Jungian analysts, people who have studied Carl Jung. His work has been such an incredible body that so many people have come to rely upon, that I studied not just him, but also others who had studied him, and the ideas that they had developed based upon what they had learned from Carl. And people like James Hollis, I think of specifically because he really introduces this midlife passage where people reach midlife, and it's not necessarily chronological. Some people experience this even at a fairly young age, even in their 20s. Although most people, it's in their 40s and 50s that they really come to this moment in their life, and it a lot of times is introduced by a significant event. It could be a divorce, could be being fired from a job. It could be that the kids are starting to move out and they're really questioning, okay, well, I've dedicated so much of my life to being a mother. And I look at the mother as a role that really does become an identity, because they put so much time into being a mother and taking care of their children. It's this instinct. And when the children move out, moms many times feel a vacancy. They wonder, okay, this is what I've been doing, so now what? And so it brings them to this midlife. Again, just as much as men experience this midlife crisis. And I say crisis, not everyone necessarily, treats it as a crisis, goes out and buys the fancy sports car and goes and does a safari, starts blowing a lot of money on things, and maybe start doing things that are out of their norm and character. And in reality, what they're doing is the unconscious mind has witnessed what the conscious mind has been pushing away, again, stuffing things in the shadow. And as we look at this, at what brings us to this point, is the first half of life, we very much live in the life of the ego. So the ego, I know from some people's perspective, is this thing that, or this aspect of us that is very negative, but in reality, it's necessary. It's part of what develops us. In fact, Carl Jung says that the first part of life, our task is to build a healthy ego. Now, we all, when we hear ego, many times we refer to as, oh, he has a big ego. And in reality, this ego is something that is developed out of what does the world want from me? And when we say the world, we might, at first we say our parents. What do my parents expect of me? And so in our youth, as psychologists have determined, that much of our programming, the beliefs that we have, the patterns that we operate by throughout our adulthood, are developed within the first 7 years of our life. And of course, we want to please our parents. So they tell us what to do, we follow their instructions, and then we become teenagers. So it's another phase of development, and we want our own identity. So that's where we definitely witness some rebelliousness, some areas where teens act out, and they're wanting to create some separation now from their own identity from their parents. They want to become themselves, and so they'll start exploring and doing things that are exactly opposite of what they've been taught. And again, not necessarily doing things that are healthy that claim their identity. They might just be doing something out of spite, just to do it differently, because they're making or staking their claim that, yes, I am my own self. I am an individual. And as we look at the influence of parents, we then extend that into schools. Again, we live in a society that is a controlled society. We have schools telling us what to think. As we look at ancient history of the philosophers of ancient Greece and Persia and Egypt, we're taught that we should be thinking. I think very specifically of Socrates, who suggests that we should teach children how to think instead of what to think. And of course, religions and institutions have these answers, and so we can continue to receive information of what we should be thinking, what the rules should be for our life. And at this midlife, this is where individuals start to question that. They start to ask themselves, if I'm not getting what I want now, and I've been doing all of these things, what is it that I can do, or what direction do I want to go? So they start questioning and thinking about their own purpose, their own value. So in Dave and I's conversation, we talked about reclaiming one's authority. And as we think about authority, parents are obviously an authority figure in our lives. And for some of us, we have incredible parents, and others experience even extreme abuse. And so that authority looks different to every individual. And then we look at school. It's definitely an authority where we're raising our hand to get permission to go to the bathroom, or asking what we can do. Same thing as we go into the university and throughout our career. If we go get a job, we have a boss. There's another authority. So we give away our authority so much of the time because that's what society demands of us. But if we have a healthy ego, it means that we've at least have recognized our own desires and our own passions, and have at least started to follow that path. And then our task of the second part of life, as we go through this midlife transition or this midlife passage, is to release the ego. And when I say release the ego, I really think about this quote from Albert Einstein, where he says that the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We've created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. And so the intuition that a Nikola Tesla experienced, and a Carl Jung, who knew that there is so much for us to experience and so much for us to know that doesn't necessarily come, or doesn't come from our own thinking, what we have developed on our own, or what our beliefs have told us who we are, or what we should be doing, but that there's this inner path. And I know that I'm sure that there's so many listeners of yours, Andrew, that have received that inner call. They've been pulled to write a book, or they feel like they've been asked to help in some way that they see would benefit others. And that I find that so many of these purposes that people feel is this desire to share this part of themselves that comes from their own unique experience, to deliver value to others. So again, just tracking back on the conversation with Dave and how you and I connected, Andrew, it really is about reclaiming one's authority. And so we look at how we've given up authority. That's the first step. Recognizing areas in how we've given it up. And then the next step is to connect with that self of who we are, who we truly are, who we were before we came to this earth. And for those that are atheist, they believe that we're biological beings, and yet so many of them will experience synchronicities, or they'll have dreams that inspire them to do things. And so again, some people can just dismiss this as just being part of our human biology, and that's what we experience, and yet others believe and understand this to be much greater than themselves, but yet it's still contained within us. And so that's why I created Soul Journey, is just going on my own path and following my instinct and experiencing synchronicities, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes many times throughout the day, that just fascinate me as I've been on this path where I'm introduced to someone, or a book falls into my hands that give me the exact answer that I'm looking for at that time. And so it really is, it's so exciting to be able to experience what I'm experiencing now versus that short period in my life. I say short period, but really it was probably 4 years that, people here on your audience, I'm sure that they may have heard the inner work or doing the shadow work. And I'm not saying that I'm done with that. This is a process. I'm learning new things every day. In fact, I had a fascinating dream 2 nights ago that just gave me more information that revealed areas that I can work on to improve myself as a human being, but also how I can help other people. So that's what I'm passionate about, and has led me to where I'm at, and why we created Soul Journey is to help people see a greater potential, a greater fulfillment and meaning in their lives.
Wonderful, wonderful introduction there. Absolutely enlightening in many ways. A lot of interesting facts you pointed out there that explain that our reality, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. And I see guided journeys to recreate on your site, Mind, Body, and Soul. Out of curiosity, why did you decide to use the phrase mind, body, and soul instead of mind, body, and spirit? It's a topic that never gets old. It's the difference between soul and spirit, if there is such a thing. Some people say soul and spirit are two different forms of the same thing. Others assert they're not the same thing. George Kafosilis from Australia, he has tried to say that consciousness and spirit both emanate from soul. Consciousness is the awareness of being aware, and spirit, best way to describe it, he says, is to think of spears as being thrown at it. Throw a spear at it. Spears being thrown at the certain places and times within the acknowledged illusion of space-time reality, for soul to manifest. That's his understanding of spirit. Yet others have given different definitions. So do you have, it's also on a somewhat related note, your website Soul Journey, you spell soul S-O-L. Isn't that the Latin name for the sun? And does that come does the word soul come from based in any way on the sun in some way? Maybe you can elaborate on this. So difference between soul and spirit, if there is one, and soul journey, significance of the sun regarding your work.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and I love talking about this because there are definitely different beliefs about the distinguish, that there is this absolute distinguishment. I want to start with the word soul. Why we chose the word Soul Journey, we spelt it S-O-L, because yes, it was go back to Roman times and the Roman god soul, and what that means. And as we look back at ancient cultures, many of them considered the sun as God, and I have really dived deep into symbolism because we have so many symbols, and as we look at our dreams, so much of that is spoken in symbolism. So soul, looking at this powerful force, the force that really enables life. If we didn't have the sun, life would not happen on this earth. And I know we could say the same thing about oxygen or water, but even without the sun, those things would not be what they are. And so the sun is such this essential component that one of the things that I've studied is, or tried to better understand as I've looked through history, even rereading the scriptures, is looking at them as a metaphor, as myth and as story versus taking everything so literal. And so I'm not sure that these ancient cultures necessarily believed that the sun was God. However, it fits as this perfect symbol of this power that we all need and can rely on. And I say rely, it's the cycle. We see its cycles and patterns and how steady it is. And so that's why we came up with soul. And let me now touch on soul, S-O-U-L, versus spirit. We wanted to make Soul Journey universal because we're talking about human nature. And whether someone is an atheist or someone is a devout Muslim or a devout Christian, we're all human. And so we're talking about the human experience. And as I look at the word soul, it is actually a translation from, or is translated as the word psyche from Greek. So psyche and soul, even from an atheist perspective, if we're talking about the soul and then we say, okay, well, really what we're talking about here is the psyche, which is our whole operating system. It includes the conscious mind, the unconscious, the ego. It includes the persona or the mask that we show to the world. Again, not revealing our entire selves or our motives to everyone. And so we have all of these aspects. And then, of course, there's this collective unconscious that we as a society, and we can look at different parts of society. So if we look at the collective unconscious of the people who live in Saudi Arabia, I have a friend who's lived there for, oh, sheesh, probably 20 years. He's from Ireland. And so he grew up in a Christian, in a Catholic home, and then has lived for 20 years in a Muslim culture. And so we've had so many conversations about the difference is of how the society operates and their culture of why it's different than the culture in Ireland or the culture in the United States. And so there's this collective unconscious that's worldwide, but also specific to different regions based upon the symbols that we've all received and how we've all been taught. The spirit, on another hand, I think that for people to look at spirit, possibly even the atheist can look at spirit as something that, when we die, what is it that makes us not be alive? Our heart stops. So again, if we look at it from a biological point of view, we see that our brain stops, heart stops, body is dead. But even for someone who is resuscitated, and there are so many stories out there, near-death experiences, people who have died for periods of time that the science says you can't be dead for 6 minutes and then come back to like, obviously there are people who have done this, but biologically, once something is dead for a long enough period of time, there is no bringing it back to life. And yet, looking at near-death experiences, atheists might look at that and say, no, this is just all being manufactured in the wiring of the brain, even though we can't detect brain activity. There is no brain activity happening. Maybe there just aren't instruments that are sensitive enough. We haven't developed the technology to see that there actually are brain waves. But as we see that with the technology or the tools that we have now, where there are no frequencies happening in the brain, there is no neural connections that we can track, and yet people are witnessing things that are happening in the operation room. They're experiencing things even outside of the room, and then they come back and they tell these stories. And I touch on this because it's something that I've experienced myself a couple of times. I've been in a couple of car accidents and had a traumatic experience just a couple of years ago, a head wound, where I experienced some similar things. Not exactly what everyone else has experienced, but so many of these relationships or so many of these stories about near death, especially those that have been declared dead for the 5 to 10 minutes, and then have returned or have come back to life, and they have these incredible stories. They're consistent. Many people meet Jesus. Some people who don't believe in Jesus or haven't really had much of a relationship with Jesus. That's an experience. I'm not saying that that's scientific proof. It's not something that I feel is my mission to prove. However, I do believe that the spirit, as we distinguish spirit and soul, spirit continues on, where I believe soul is this conjunction. There are a couple of great books out there about how our bodies are these recorders. One is, let me just think of the titles here. Your Body is Your Subconscious Mind is one, and the other one is Your Body Keeps the Score. And many studies of epigenetics and other studies that the theories are that our memories, everything that happens to us, and also the way that we perceive things, all is recorded not just in our brain, but in the cells of our bodies. And so when we have this gut reaction to something we witness, it sometimes can be stemmed back to something that maybe we witnessed or observed at a much earlier age, and that gives us that connection. So again, all of these symbols and all of these perceptions and the language that we operate with, it's part of our body. So as I distinguish between spirit and soul, I really like looking at soul as this psyche, but I include body and mind as being part of it. So soul really is this conglomerate, in my mind. The way that I perceive it is it's spirit, body, and mind, but we chose to use body, mind, and soul because, again, many people interchange soul and spirit together, but soul can also be taken just as psyche and can be looked at as this third, I was going to say platform, but that's not the word I'm looking for, but this third area or dimension by which is a tool for us to better understand ourselves and operate by. So yeah, spirit, does it continue on? Again, my personal belief based on my experiences and the stories that I feel, and I say feel, again, this is now personal. Just because someone feels something doesn't mean it's true, but it's something that I like to believe, that there is this afterlife. And Andrew, I don't want to just keep rambling on, but I do have, some things that I want to share about, spirit and even possibly Jesus or Buddha and these other great figures, because there are people who have near-death experience. They don't see Jesus, but they see Buddha, and it's based upon their belief system and what that is. And one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, that I've started to not take things literal as I look at history and as I look at especially scripture. So much of that is written in dream. A lot of it is written about dreams, but it's written about metaphors. It's a story that helps us better understand our own psychology and our own psyche. And so from that perspective, I studied Gnosticism, and it's very much built around viewing symbols and metaphors. And as we look at the resurrection, so I know, this is one of the contentions that atheists have is, there is no proof that Jesus walked this earth. We don't have historical. Why did the Roman history not talk about that? Well, we can look at the times back then, and I'm not trying to be an apologist or excuse it, but there are cultures who claim that Jesus came and visited their land. So that missing time from the age of 12 to when he was 30 years old and returned on the scene in the New Testament, where are those years? And there are cultures in India and other areas on the planet that they said, oh yeah, this man by the name of Yeshua came and visited, and he sat down with our teachers and they exchanged information. It wasn't just this Jesus was all knowing, and so he went and taught around the world. But that 12 year to his 12th year to his 30th year, that it was really a path for him to go learn more. And yes, he, according to these records, he did teach, but he also was on a learning path. He was learning more. There are some people who even claim that you look at the teachings of Jesus, not of Christians and how they teach them, but the actual teachings of Jesus, and connect that with his travels to India and other Asian parts of the world. They claim that Jesus really was a Buddhist. His understanding was, it was more related to Buddhism, even though he understood Jewish scripture and grew up as, in the Jewish culture and as a Jew. He brought back so much more information that really made this a universal um, spirituality or understanding of what our own potential is. And if I look at the message of Jesus, it is about, loving one another, and it begins with love, but it also is very much a teaching of reclaiming one's authority. And so anyway, I know a long answer, but I did want to kind of touch a little bit broader than just on soul and spirit. Any other thoughts or questions? I know you've studied a lot about spirit and soul, Andrew.
Well, yes, I have. As I said, the difference, if there is one, certainly a subject that never gets old. By the way, I can go a little over an hour with you, even though I used to do 2-hour shows. I stopped doing that because people have lousy attention spans. Not really a good idea to do shows that long anymore, I figured. But I'll go a little longer with you just because I haven't done a show in a while and you have some other subjects to talk about. However, from this point onward, this interview will be pay-per-view. Only if you want to listen to the rest of this interview, please subscribe on Patreon to my Patreon account so you can get the rest of this interview, listeners. With that being said,